Welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. I'm your host, Gurunischan. As always, I like to share the reasons why I started this podcast. Number one, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in the name of neutrality. Number two, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who have joined this lifestyle, were born and raised into it, and or who have taught or practiced Kundalini Yoga. Number three, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number four, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will fight for their truth to be addressed. Number five, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing to victims. Number six, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural appropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and overall community ethos. Number seven, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number eight, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, toxic positivity, and light-washing mentality. Number nine, to honor all of the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor each and every body that has come through this community, both named and unnamed. And number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, to process their own emotions, to get somatic therapy and other therapy and cult-specific therapy and support that's needed, to draw your own conclusions, and to be critical thinkers rather than to just blindly follow anyone. Please remember that your story matters. Please share it when you're ready. We're here to listen and to support you. I want to welcome today's guest, Namkirn Khalsa. She was born and raised in 3HO in the Salt Lake City, Utah in 1973. Her parents are Ramdas Singh and Ramdas Kaur. She went to GNFC from 1986 to 1988. She got out of 3HO when her mom left the Dharma and took her at 14 years old, and her sister, Lakshmi Narayan, at 11 years old. Today, she lives in Portland, Oregon, and is a public middle school, high school teacher in fine arts and Spanish bilingual education. She has a 26-year-old son that she raised as a single mom, and she has a baby grandson who is 2 years old. She's an artist and Latin dancer. I want to welcome you to the podcast, Namkirn.
Thank you.
I usually ask guests, why do you feel it's important to tell your story or to share your story?
Well, I feel like, at least for me, and I'm assuming for a lot of other people from my age group, that there has been like a culture of silence, of not talking about it, and I'm really sick of that. And also, I just feel like it's like it helps. It will like help all of us like normalize like talk about our experiences if we can hear other people talk about them. A lot of us have been through a tremendous amount of trauma. And so hearing somebody else's story might open you up to being able to talk about your own story. And I also think that the first generation needs to hear our stories. I think even in the shows that have come out and the things that they're talking about, everything seems like it's really focused on the first generation. You know, us and the second generation, our stories aren't really being told, and we didn't have a choice what happened to us or what we went through. And we also really have like really intense, really fascinating life stories to talk about. So I just think all of those things combined are really amazing. Also, even as a young person, when I came back from India, I really felt like it was really important to talk about what was happening over there. My father silenced me. He was very strict and very, very fanatical Sikh. He was the leader of the Salt Lake City Ashram. He silenced me immediately when I came back from India and told me, I don't want to hear your horror stories. It was the best thing for you. Shut your mouth. You're going back. I mean, basically, that's what he said to me. And so I was really shut down for many years. I couldn't even talk to my dad without just physically shaking because I felt like I had all this inside of me and I was supposed to hold it and suppress it. It was a significant amount of trauma for me, just holding all of the pain that I went through. And so I just eventually just started talking. I felt like that was the most helpful thing to do. And I ended up also testifying at one point in court for another two children parents were having the similar custody battle that my parents had. And one parent wanted them sent back to India and one parent did not. And I ended up testifying and telling my story. And the kids stayed home. And later on, I mean, I think the kids didn't find out about it for many, many years because I recently met one of the women now. She's a woman now, and she was like, "Oh my God, that probably saved my sibling's life that we didn't go back." And so I just feel like this is really an important thing to do, to talk about our stories. 'Cause it can save people's lives mentally and emotionally and physically, everything, I just feel like it's really important. So,
It's just really profound
yeah.
what you're saying, the echo effect and the ripple effect of what it means to break the code of silence
Hmm. Yeah.
and how that really impacts our lives in tangible ways, not just personally, but also collectively.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, not just about ourselves, it's also for everybody else too. And I personally don't really feel like kids should be going back to India at all anymore. I feel like that needs to stop. I'm astounded that it's even still happening in any way, shape, or form. And so if there's anything that I can say or do to try to stop that from happening, I will. So, yeah.
Well said. So tell us, bring us back, born and raised in the ashram, and
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. So I was born and raised in Salt Lake City in an ashram. My parents were Sikhs before I was born. They had been dating each other, but Yogi Bhajan told them to get married. So they did. They got married, and my dad was very intensely fanatical Sikh, like really, really into it. And so he was sent because they originally were both from the Pacific Northwest, from Portland, from Oregon and Washington. And so Yogi Bhajan sent my father and mother to Utah to start an ashram there and gather people. And so that was my whole childhood. I lived in a ashram that sort of had rotating doors, people living with us and moving in and moving out. And because my dad was so fanatical, we did he woke us up even as little girls, little children. We woke up with ice cold showers at 4 a.m. and had doing intense yoga and even just trying to sit still. And my dad would try to force us to sit still and not move and not scratch and not do anything. Like a 5-year-old kid, don't scratch your nose for half an hour, don't move a muscle in your body. It was really a really intense way to grow up. And
Was he more into the being a Sikh and she was a yoga teacher? Were they both yoga teachers because they were running the ashram? Was it a yoga focus and an ashram like Sikh? Um, or you know how the ashrams got mold in different ways. I was trying to get a feeling. Um, you were born at home, like most.
Yes, I was born at home. We had just a doctor that came over to the house. We were born in my mom's bed, both my sister and I. And my father did the majority of the teaching. We did have yoga classes that they were doing all the time, and we had Gurdwara in our house every Sunday. And my mother just was I think she was more support kind of thing. She didn't do as much of the teaching. My father was really the one that was really intense about it, and he had been in the military before, and he was very super disciplined and structured and stuff like that. And so he really just kind of ran the show. As far as I can remember, I was very young during that time, so it's kind of hard to remember everything, but that's what I remember pretty clearly is my dad kind of being the leader of everything. Yeah, and it was a very strange kind of environment and city to grow up in Salt Lake City as a Sikh. I had to, my father immediately we were wearing turbans to school and, white, treat us, everything. We had to wear the whole thing, even as little kids to school. And Utah is very Mormon. And it was like the weirdest thing that anybody had ever seen. We were pretty brutally teased in school and very quickly removed from public school because it was so brutal. So the only private schools around really were Catholic schools. So my parents sent us before we went to India. We were sent to Catholic school, but then had to like kind of be separate because we weren't Catholic. So like during communion, all that kind of stuff, we had to go like sit off to the side and stuff like that. So it's very strange, strange reality. And the kids that I played with that lived across the street from me were from a Mormon bigamist family. They had like, I don't know, 12 children and a mother trying to raise 12 children with a father who was sharing with like he had 3 different families. And it was the whole culture in Utah was very strange, and I remember people just walking up to us when I was a kid and just being like, "What are you?" You know, "Hey, just what are you?" Like, I remember my father training us. He's like had us memorize, being like, "We are Sikhs. It is a religion that originated in India," and like like had this whole like response, like memorized response that I was supposed to supposed to recite when people asked me that question. But
I'm having like tremor memories right now because it's so true. Like, what are you? What are you? And then they would be like, "What's that?" Like pointing with a pen on your head. What else? What's that? Wait, so, I mean, you'd say your name, and
Mhm.
they'd be like, "What's that?"
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the kids are brutal too. I got marshmallow head, diaper head, all of the like awful kinds of yeah, I mean, and I had my sister, and then also I think for a short amount of time in the public school, Jagaguru and Guru Gungyan were part of our ashram. And I think they might have gone to public school with me for a short period of time, but they didn't go to the Catholic school though.
Were they sent to your ashram as kids?
Their whole family lived like 2 houses down from us, like right on the same street as us. So we had a bigger house that was the main ashram, and people would come and we had a lot of people. We had like 2 other families living in that ashram, and we had like a big, garden in the back and grew our food and did, the whole natural living kind of thing. And then they had a smaller house like right down the street, so they'd come over for all this stuff, and they'd sometimes trade us off and things like that, but it was not never like we never did an intentional parent trading kind of situation like I've heard some other families did.
The ashram style was that there was the main center house that had several families in the main ashram,
Mhm.
but then there started to be a population of other families on that block.
Yeah, basically.
And did they like buy properties, or was it like the ashram community buying those properties and then people set there as families?
I actually I don't know. I was, I was so young, so I wasn't involved in that process. It could have been that they just intentionally bought their own properties nearby or the ashram bought it. I actually don't have any idea about that. But there definitely was like a couple other families that cropped up and ended up living right in the same like neighborhood as us because I think because we just couldn't fit everybody in the same house after a while. It just got too big.
In that house. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the people you mentioned were other second gen born ins, Jagat Guru,
Jagaguru.
who is currently the KRI CEO,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yes, he is.
And then Guru Gunjan
Uh-huh.
is another born in. He's the older brother of Jagaguru. God, I forgot that.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're brothers. They both were sent to India about the same time, about I think the same year that I went to India as well. Or maybe actually maybe a slightly after me, but I can't remember exactly. But But yeah, so I did spend a lot of time with them as a young person, and they, people called them my brothers. I actually haven't really had any contact with them since I left India. But when I was younger,
Just well.
we were close with each other. Yeah. And there was another family that lived there too, but the children that were born in that family actually didn't end up. I ended up going to India, and they were much younger. They were much, much younger than me. So, yeah. Not from the same
Got it.
generation.
So you're in the house, main house, which ends up having a couple families living in it, as well as like rotating yoga students or people that are coming from other ashrams, just all the people that come in and out of ashrams over your childhood experience.
Yes. Huh? Yeah. And that was weird sometimes because you get people suffering with pretty serious mental health issues and drug addiction issues and things like that. And so there were definitely times where like, don't go in that room because the person who can't figure out how to function is in that room. I remember having somebody staying up in one of the bedrooms one time that wouldn't come out for like a week, and she was peeing in a jar, and so there was some weird things, like people using it kind of as a place to stay. They're having mental health breaks and things like that. Yeah, definitely rotating people coming in and out a lot of the ashram.
You bring up a really good point because as the Phoenix ashram, my dad was also the director of that ashram during my childhood. Um, and there were also a lot of crazies that came to ashram and people that were suffering from serious mental health things. And he was the person that they had to come and have like minister sessions with, so to speak. So I can just think of a much smaller version of what our ashram was because you're talking about in your own house, in rooms of the house,
Yeah.
different people are living versus the next door ashram where that was happening and like we lived next door.
Right. Yeah. No, this was like right in my house. Like I slept right above the Gurdwara. This was definitely my house that we lived in. Yeah.
Talk about cozy.
Yep. Yep. It was cozy. Yeah.
So what else? Do you have some things you want to share about the early years of the ashram before heading to India?
Aside from, normal childhood things that everybody has that are separate from that, it's like hard to think of things. Some of the main things that I think that were just kind of the strange experiences for me were growing up in a state in the United States that was highly religious of another religion, and then going to a school that was highly religious of another religion that I wasn't in, and like always feeling this sense of like separateness and never feeling like I fit anywhere, and that I looked weird, and that I like my whole life was just very weird to people. And the weird confusion about religion too, like I'm doing all this chanting and all this kind of stuff at home, and then like I can tell you like all the Catholic prayers. I can do all the Our Fathers and Hail Marys and all those kinds of things too. Like, and so then I'd go to school. So there was a lot of like strange kinds of things that happened around just around religion and stuff like that when I was very young, and just kind of watching it with confusion and go like, what is going on here, and why are we doing this kind of other thing? Are we special somehow? Thinking there was something special or different about us or something like that. So yeah, and then also feeling that feeling of different all the time, and then my parents sort of talking about India like it was this like amazing, wonderful place where I was going to fit in. Like everybody was going to be like me, and I was going to fit with everybody, and it was gonna be like some kind of like amazing paradise. Like really, they're like, there's gonna be places to swim, you're gonna have horseback riding, you're gonna love it there, and you're gonna have all these kids that are gonna just like have the same kind of upbringing as you, and everybody's gonna look like you, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna be like this amazing thing. So that was one of those things, and my parents were working for a very long time to save money to send us because my parents were very poor. And so it took them a couple years to save up enough money for my plane ticket. And then they had to wait a little bit, delay my sister's arrival too, because they didn't quite have enough money to pay for her plane ticket at the same time. So they shipped me off alone first.
So they would have sent you a lot earlier if they could have.
Yes, yeah, they were talking about it. I can remember as far back as I think first or second grade where my parents were talking about me going to India and this amazing experience that I was going to have when that happened. And so they wanted to ship me, as soon as possible, but it just took them time to like save money. 'Cause my dad, worked for Service Master. He was cleaning carpets and my mom was selling jewelry and they weren't making a lot of money. Yeah.
Right. They weren't the ballers of 3HO.
No, they were not. They were kind of bottom of the totem pole. Yeah.
We talk a lot about the caste system within 3. That there were just those among us that were of the peasant caste, and they worked and did big classes and did faith. Then there were like the business class. It was very distinct what group you were from.
Yeah, but just really interesting because I do remember seeing other people having more money and having more things. We didn't have that. And that's probably why we lived in the ashram because we had to share the space with so many people.
And how that's tied into the mission,
Yeah. Hmm.
and somebody that's like devoted, like your father, that's willing to just sacrifice everything
Everything. Yeah.
and kind of forget that he's a provider,
Hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how that's built into the manipulation of the system itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think actually my sister was just telling me the other day because we help each other kind of like piece memories together. What ended up happening with my sister's ticket actually is that one of the people that did have more money, ended up helping pay for her ticket to go. So yeah, we didn't have enough. And they bought one-way tickets and did not have the money to bring us back. So that's also a thing.
What?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, so talk about, like, investment in this thing, like, they saved up money for, like, a few years and then bought this, like, one-way ticket and then shipped their tiny children to the other side of the world, and they had not seen the school, they had not been there, they did not know what they were doing as far as what they were getting into with it. I was 11 when I was sent, then my sister was 8, and I went first. I think I went about 3 or 4 months ahead of my sister, and it was scary. It was really, really scary, and I remember feeling like excited at first, and then, like, you get there, and the finality of it, you don't understand, like, as a child, like, the reality of what's happening to you in that kind of a situation. Like, I just remember getting there and, like, going, "Oh my god, I'm scared, I want my mom." Like or I want my dad, I want my mom, I want somebody and, like, you couldn't even call home. You couldn't there was nobody that was gonna help you. That sudden feeling of horrible dread of, like, where am I? And nobody's gonna help me. I think I laid in my bed for, like, a couple days before somebody made me get out of bed because I just hid in under the musty, horrible quilts. I just hid there and wouldn't get out of my bed. I just sat there and cried, and nobody came. And so, like, as a child, that was one of my first experiences of like crying and nobody coming, when I cried. And so I just cried for like 2 days. And then eventually I think somebody came and like knocked on my bed and said, "Hey, sit up. I want to take a picture of you for your parents." And they like snapped a picture of me and sent it home. And I had been in my days bed crying for 2 days. So my mom was like, "Oh, look how happy my daughter looks." I mean, so yeah, I mean, it was just, yeah, I think eventually hunger probably got me out of my bed, but then it was, then going to eat was a whole other story. I think in the TV show, Mahani talked a little bit about the food. It was, it was full of bugs and had rocks and things in it. There was really not, it was very not nutritious. It was really, really awful. And a lot of kids, including me, got sick from it all the time and got, just tapeworms and parasites and all kinds of things. We were drinking water right out of the tap in India, of all places. Like, as an adult who's traveled a lot now, like, I would, like, even when I, even just anywhere, go to Mexico, definitely, you could get bottled water, like, in India, like, holy mackerel. If I think about us, we're just, like, going to the taps and, like, drinking the water out of the tap, with our hands. We were sick. We were sick a lot. We were sick a lot from the food and the water. So yeah.
Now, you attended GNFC,
Yes, GNFC.
which is the first school the program that started in like 1980 that you all got sent to go over there.
It was 85 or 86. It was 86. 86 when I arrived. So there were people that already been there before me by like 5 years or something like that. Um,
And did you know the other kids, some of them, because you had been to like children camps and ladies camps growing up? Or did you only know the people from your own ashram?
no, I mean, I had met some of the kids, but like I wasn't really close with any of them because we lived so far away. We did go to Solstice every year when I was young, and my dad did. I went to children's camp and stuff like that. So there were definitely kids that I recognized and things like that, but I didn't have like close friends. There was one other girl that came with me that was much, much younger than me. Oh gosh, I don't know. She was probably 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old. And she was, I was told by my parents and her parents to take care of her as an 11-year-old. And she had really significant health issues as a 6-year-old. And I was put in charge of her and just like take care of her, comb the lice out of her hair, like, be her, be her family. I didn't know how to take care of my own self. So, like, it was incredibly difficult, and I didn't, I didn't do a good job, of it at all. I'm sure of it. Poor thing. So yeah, she's the one that I went over with. She was much younger, and there were other kids in my group. I remember traveling eventually with a group. I mean, was sent from Utah and then I think when I got to, I don't know, where we stopped over somewhere in the United States, maybe New York or whatever, wherever we stopped, we met up with a group of other kids going over there. And talk about a horrific trip, even just getting over there. All these groups of kids being just confused and lost and scared. I mean, I remember driving up the mountain to go to the school. I mean, this was in the Himalayan mountains, like the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, and like there was these bus switchbacks going up the mountains, and I just looking down out the window, and there's like off the edge of the cliff, there's like buses down at the bottom of the cliff that had just toppled over and feeling like terrified, like going up this huge mountain in this bus, like at any seconds, like tearing up the switchbacks going up the mountains, like at top speed, and feeling scared and having to go to the bathroom, kids like puking out the window, like, and then we did have a bathroom stop. This is like, I'm jumping back and forth, getting out of the bus and just being like, boys on one side, girls on the other west side, pee outside. Just pee or whatever you got to do out in the open. Yeah, I mean, especially for kids that maybe had never squatted to go to the bathroom before, very confusing and scary. Going to the bathroom outside is humiliating, right, in front of other people. There was nowhere to no privacy or anything like that. So yeah, just the trip.
Wearing full bana.
Yeah, wearing full bana. Like, yeah, definitely had to wear full bana.
So full turban, you were in a full kurta and chiritas, and
Mhm.
I'm pointing this out because you had mentioned, you're flying and then meeting up with the group along the way. It could have been in New York or in France or whatever,
Yeah.
because kids are being sent from all their remote and respective ashrams.
Yeah.
some from real small ones like here, others from bigger places like Herndon, Virginia or LA, where there might be like 8 to 10 people coming from one location,
Yeah.
and then small ashrams where there's just 1 or 2, someone really small, like the little girl who's 6,
Yeah.
and you who's 11, the adult, and put in charge of taking care of this child who should never leave the country, much less her parents.
No.
And then you're describing the going up the mountain and being just put into the scenario where, oh, you got to just do basic things like pee. Well, this is how that's going to go.
Yeah.
And all this is the first day you're arriving, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just like, yeah, just on the first day. And I mean, people, little ones, little kids just crying for their moms and being confused and wanting to go home already, just like not understanding what's happening and not enough adults, not enough like caretakers for all. I mean, we had a huge group of us and there was probably 2 or 3 adults like taking us on this massive journey to the other side of the world. And kids ranging in age from like kindergarten on up, to almost high school because kids went home and came back too sometimes. So, yeah, we had a full bus and we didn't look normal to the rest of the world in India. It's not like I went to India. Everybody was like, "Oh, look at you. You look like a Sikh." No, because what I learned quickly too is that you don't, Sikhism in India is not the same thing, which I didn't know as a young person. But yeah, I mean, it was just the process of going there was very traumatic. And we got to the school and all of my personal things were taken from me. I mean, I had a whole trunk full of like clothes. I brought my Barbie dolls, because I was a little kid, and I brought, just things that were important to me and stuff like that. And pretty much anything that was interesting or cool and not like absolutely utilitarian was just taken. Like, I don't know where it went. If somebody went through my things and took a lot of my stuff, all my toys were gone, things that were important to me that cared about from home basically were taken. Um,
By the time you arrived at the school or while you're there,
Well, both happened. I mean, when I first arrived at the school, somebody had gone through my stuff and taken a lot of things out of it already just by the time I got my trunk when I got to school. But then yeah, I mean, even at the school, things just disappeared. Kids just stole from each other and stuff. So we didn't in the end I didn't end up coming home with anything that I started off with because all of my personal clothes from home, I mean, underwear, down to underwear was like hot commodity because I don't know, nobody got extra underwear. So like, and you didn't send them off to the laundry because they wouldn't come back. And so, people were trying to wash their underwear and stuff in the sink and walking around wearing filthy clothes. Let me tell you, because as a little kid, if you've never washed your own clothes before in the sink, your parents have washed your clothes your whole life. And suddenly, if you send your clothes to the laundry, they might get stolen unless it's your school uniform. And so your underwear is one of those things you don't send because they came from home, they were going to disappear. So we walked around in filth, in like real filth. Like, I won't get into too much graphic detail about it, but like it was very bad. It was very bad. The filthy clothes that I lived in for the time that I was there. I mean, I can't imagine how I smelled. It's like just like dirt caked on my neck and stuff like that. And yeah, just really, really, really dirty. Not taken care of.
was there any support in the girls' school or how that worked among ages of
Yeah, we kind of had like there was a system that we're supposed to have where the older girls took care of younger girls, kind of kind of system that was, but you were sort of, you were assigned a younger sister, basically, which is what they did kind of to me when that little girl came with me. They kind of assigned her as my younger sister. I had an older sister, but she was in a different dormitory and wasn't, and was in her own trauma and also didn't know. She was, I think at the time, she was maybe like 15 or 16 and had been in trauma already. And there were some times when she was kind of helpful and supportive of me, but we were all just kids in trauma. So assigning us to help each other was really not very productive. And we had DDs that lived like there that came to the dorm. So these women, these Indian women that would come get one dormitory would have one woman that would be the woman that was supposed to help all of us get ready in the morning. I mean, I remember counting the beds in my dormitory. There was, I don't know, a hallway that had like 50 beds in it. Like I was sleeping in a hallway with like 50 girls or something. And so getting 50 little girls ready to go to school in the morning just didn't. And a lot of times I think that the women either didn't speak English very well, so it was hard to communicate with them, or didn't feel comfortable working with the American kids. I'm not really sure because most of the time we didn't get any help. Granted, as a kid, I didn't ask either because I was too scared and I didn't know that that was even a thing that I could do. But yeah, I saw these women oftentimes, combing the Indian girls and the Thai girls. I saw them combing their hair and picking lice out of their hair and trying to help them braid their hair to get ready for school and stuff like that. But I never saw any of them helping the American girls at all. So we had a Dee a lady that lived in the dorm for that reason, and then we had a matron that also lived in the dormitory in a room next to the dormitory that was supposed to kind of help supervise things. But the woman that we had was really just not. There wasn't much. She would walk around and bang on our beds to wake us up in the morning and scream at us a lot. But other than that, nobody made sure that we bathed or that we ate or that we were doing well emotionally or if there was any needs that we had that weren't met. Nobody was really making sure. Like we were pretty much like feral. We were like living however we could and trying to help each other.
And was your dorm age specific?
Yeah, it was age specific. And it changed because my dorm shifted a couple times. It wasn't in the beginning, but then I think in the beginning it had like 2 or 3 grade levels in it or something. I don't know, because it seemed more mixed in the beginning, and then later on it got more and more specific because I remember when my sister first got there, she was allowed to sleep in the same dormitory as me, but later on she was moved out and not allowed to be in the same building as me anymore. So, yeah.
Wow. So you're there 3 to 4 months ahead of time. And then your sister comes and she's going to be in your dorm with you because she's a younger sister.
Yeah, so
And then eventually they would age that out.
yeah, and they kind of aged it. Yeah, eventually I think that's what happened, if my memory is correct, is that they sort of would change things and they shifted things around because I remember being in the same building almost the whole time, but definitely remember my sister being moved out and different people being moved in and things like that. So they may have shifted the kind of age groups. And I remember the little ones, the really little kindergarten age kids being down below us in a dormitory below us in the same building. So, yeah. And my sister arrived about 3 or 4 months after me. She was really disoriented, as I probably was when I first arrived too, but I recognized what was going on with her because she looked terrified. And I was also just like so relieved to see somebody from home. Like I remember just like being just like in tears, just like so like happy to see her, like because she still smelled good for one thing. She smelled like home, like, and she just like looked all perfect and like almost angelic to me. I remember her like showing up and just being like in awe of my sister, just like this was like this most amazing thing that my sister was there with me and being so proud and so happy. I just remember kind of like, trying to show her where things were and help her because I wanted to take care of her because immediately went into like, I'm going to be the parent now. And so on the next day after my sister arrived, there was an attic that we had been using. We were supposed to hang our clothes up there. When we washed our clothes by hand, we were supposed to go climb up this ladder and go into an attic and hang up our clothes. There was some clotheslines up there where you could hang your clothes up to dry in an attic. And so I think it was the day after my sister arrived, there were some clothes and we had to go up there, and she went up there with me and we climbed up this ladder, and she was above me. We went up there, put things up there and started climbing back down. She was above me on the ladder, and was being held up by a stick. A trapdoor was being held up by a stick. It was a very heavy trapdoor. Apparently my sister grabbed the stick. This part I didn't see. I was below her on the ladder, but apparently she grabbed the stick and it came out. And the trapdoor fell down and hit her on the head and knocked her out. And she was up at the top of the ladder. And she fell headfirst over the side of the ladder and hit headfirst on concrete.
Whoa.
And yeah, and I was standing there. I watched the whole thing. And it was super surreal. This is a little bit like it's a hard thing for me to talk about, but still, but it was very like,
Yes.
very surreal experience. Everything like time slowed down. It was confusing. It was like, I couldn't understand. I kept trying to talk to her, and she was sort of making a really horrible, low, gurgling noise and bleeding out of her mouth and nose. And all the kids just sort of started crowding around and looking at her because nobody knew what to do. There was nobody watching us. There was nobody taking care of us. And so we were all these like little kids, just everybody came and were like standing around this poor little thing that's like bleeding out on the floor. And then eventually somebody called the matron. And so this matron lady comes lumbering in and screaming at everybody and shoving everybody out of the way and picks her up like a rag doll, which I, as an 11-year-old, already knew that if somebody had a head injury and had fallen, you weren't supposed to move them. This lady just grabbed her up and yanked her off the floor and then took her over and threw her onto a bed. She could have killed her in that instant. I am so glad. But I ran after this lady screaming at her, like, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to. Of course, she's not going to listen to me because I'm a little kid. And then just stood there in shock. And so then this lady's like trying to deal with my sister, and my sister started throwing punches. Apparently she was unconscious, but like her body was like freaking out, and people would touch her. She had broken her collarbone and had a hematoma, a brain bleed. And so people would touch her collarbone, and she was throwing punches at people who touched her. And I remember standing close by and then like taking steps back and moving. Somehow I ended up like back on the other side of the room, just standing there, like watching the situation happening and not knowing what to do. And at one point, somebody who I don't remember anymore just came and said, you need to go. It's breakfast time. And I was dragged out of there. I was dragged out of there and taken to the cafeteria, and breakfast was put in front of me. Just like completely stunned, in shock, terrified, like sick. And yeah, and eventually I think probably an hour later, I saw like some kind of a truck come and carry my sister up on a stretcher and take her away in a truck. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't function very well. I, of course, couldn't eat. And I was just kind of forced all day to just like sit, do my normal things. Like nobody told me what was going on. Eventually, What happened is Nanak Dev came and picked me up and took me to the hospital to be with my sister. I don't remember if it was in the same day or if it was the next day because my memory is really weird. It's kind of, I think, amazing that I can remember as much as I can about it. But he took me to the hospital and I immediately passed out when I saw her cold on the floor because she was still covered in blood, had dried blood all over her, and was yelling about how she needed orange juice. She was incoherent, but she kept saying she needed orange juice because my mother used to give us orange juice, the whole health food vitamin C thing. She needed orange juice because she was sick. But for me, just seeing her like, like she'd, like that. I literally lost consciousness. Like I blacked out. I fell on the floor and woke up on a hospital bed, like next to her. So Nanak Dev took care of my sister actually, which is a very interesting kind of situation because she didn't have anything bad happen. A lot of people had really awful experiences, I heard, with Nanak Dev, but he was put in charge of her and had to take her to Delhi. They had to life flight her to Delhi because she was going to die. She had a brain bleed happening. And they had American doctors fighting with the Indian doctors because they were going to have to drill a burr hole to get the pressure off of her brain. And the Indian doctors were saying she'll die of infection here if we drill a burr hole in her brain. And the American doctors were like, she's going to die if you don't. And then, like, so they were just like going back and forth. And eventually they did one last scan before they were going to make a burr hole, and it was dissolving on its own. So it was kind of just like this amazing thing, and so they eventually just let it go. They didn't do the burr hole and they didn't do the operation. She ended up healing, which of course then everybody attributed to all the chanting and all of the prayers and all of the it's a miracle, and YB gave us this anything. Yeah, it was really amazing that she ended up healing from that.
You're saying that she was flown from that local hospital to Delhi and he had to do that, and YB was notified, and there was a whole
Yeah.
known thing back in the US about this incident.
Yeah. Yes. My parents knew about it. Everybody knew what had happened. And there is even an announcement, I think, about it posted in a newsletter that I actually have a copy of now because, like the newsletter that went home to parents. And it was all like, oh, your kids are doing great. And Lakshmi Narayan had this like terrible had this accident, but because of all of everybody's prayers and everything, she's miraculously just healing and everything's going amazing and she's doing great at school and all this kind of. We didn't go home after that. I mean, we
Unbelievable.
went back to school. I never even had a phone call with my parents after I went through that. Nothing.
I was going to ask if they flew over.
There was no, there I didn't have any communication with my parents about this whole incident for the whole 2 years that I was in India. This happened when she first got there, and same with my sister. I think my sister got one phone call with my parents when she was in Delhi, but that was it, and then she was sent back to the school and went back
This
to
was
school.
crazy.
Yeah, after going through all that, I went back to school and we were all supposed to just, like, pick up and continue on. I mean, and my poor sister, after she went through this horrible trauma, then she came back and she got some favoritism with the matron was like nicer to her because she felt bad for her. So she'd like walk down the hall screaming at all of us, wake up, and like pounding on our beds and like screaming at us to get out of bed and shut our mouths and stuff like that. And then she'd come to my sister's bed and she'd like tap her on the shoulder and be like, wake up, sweetie. And that kind of like Lord of the Flies situation that doesn't go over well. So my sister was bullied terribly after that. I mean, the kids were not kind. They were not kind to her. She has some really intense residual trauma just from the way she was treated from the other kids after she got back to the school.
That's insane.
Yeah. 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 I mean, as far as American adults that were there at the school, I remember like 2 in the whole school. I mean, there weren't very many with us, like at least during my time period. I remember maybe two or three American adults there, and I mean, there were some Indian teachers that were very nice to us and stuff like that, but I mean, I yeah, but there was just the ratio of the kids, just the ratio of you got 50 young children living in a dormitory with one lady who's trying to make sure that we're all bathing and changing our clothes and getting well fed. They didn't do any of that. They didn't make sure any of our needs were being met at all. I mean, even when we got sick, I got the mumps when I was there, and I was put in a sick I was just quarantined. We were just taken out and just locked in a quarantine for like a few weeks until it went away. Um, but yeah, people were getting mumps. Hepatitis was like rampant. Like everybody had hepatitis because frankly, there was shit everywhere because, the dormitory bathrooms, just people were shitting on the floors. There was piles of shit everywhere on the floors in the bathroom. People were not comfortable. I don't know why that happened. I mean, no, I work with children now, and I know that severely traumatized kids will do things like that, like shit in strange places and stuff like that. The amount of filth that we were living in, and it was causing consistently, we were just all getting really, really sick. I didn't get hepatitis, but I got the mumps, and many, many of the kids that I knew were just walking around contagious, even with hepatitis and the mumps. I remember seeing girls just not even being quarantined having it. So, yeah, the conditions were very, very bad that we lived in. We all had severe lice. We had whale lice, which means they're very large bugs crawling on your scalp. Like not nits anymore, like large bugs crawling on your scalp and biting you, and bed bugs that were biting up my arms and legs. So I was just covered in itchy bugs and bites and stuff like that. I was scarred up by the time I got back home. Just really horrific kind of circumstances. So, and nobody was trying to get the lice out of our hair. We had hot water one time a week. We had hot water once a week, and people would fight. We had it for like maybe, I think, an hour, maybe two at the most in the dormitories. And so and we had like maybe 8 to 10 stalls where you could fill up a bucket of water and pour it over yourself to take a shower because there wasn't showers. We just had a bucket and a cup, and that's how we bathed. I mean, yeah, so they would guard the stalls because it would come on Sunday morning. The hot water would come on Sunday morning. People would guard the stalls and then be in line for stall. There was no way you could get a chance to get in there unless you were like one of the older, more pushy kids that got your chance. So if I was bathing, it was in glacier water all the time, like to the point where I would lean over because you had to bend your head over and to get your hair in the faucet and wash your hair. And I remember getting severe migraines from the ice water, just like, giving you like an ice cream headache, and then you can't get the soap out of your hair, but because it's ice cold water, but you're getting like a headache from it and stuff like that. And so washing was a really unpleasant experience. Um, so we lived in those conditions for a couple of years because my parents didn't have the capacity to bring us back home. I mean, they didn't have the money. And that's, I think, the main crux of the situation. I think my mom wanted I know my mom wanted us to come home when the accident even happened and stuff. And my father was very insistent. No, they have to stay. They have to stay. It's going to be fine. My mother ended up borrowing money from my grandparents to bring us back home just to visit. I mean, my father wouldn't even let her do it unless it was a round trip ticket. It had to be either we were going to stay there or we were going to get a round trip ticket. So eventually my mom bought a round trip ticket with my borrowing money from her parents. Her parents were like totally opposed to us being there in the first place, didn't want us there. So she was considering already, like not sending us back. And from her perspective, the way she tells the story, which I don't remember looking at myself from the outside, but when I came back home, what she says is that both of us were emaciated and covered in lice and bugs and parasites, had parasites, and like severely traumatized to the point where she didn't recognize us practically when she looked at us. And my mother was just like, I can't in good conscience do this to my children anymore. So my mother and father got into it about it because my father, still being his like militant self, was like, yes, they are. We have this ticket and they're going back at the end of the break. We're sending them back. My mother was like, no. And so they had this whole struggle about it. So my mom just like packed up and ran one day. He was gone working and she just packed us up, packed up the car and ran. And we hid in a friend of hers basement for a couple months while she got a restraining order because she was terrified. I mean, whether it's realistic, I don't know what was going to happen. She doesn't know what was going to happen if she didn't get it, but she was terrified that if she didn't have a restraining order, my dad was going to take us and put us on the plane without her permission, and then we would be gone and she wouldn't be able to get us back because she didn't have the money. So she was terrified. So she went to court, she got a restraining order, and we hid out and didn't go to school and didn't do anything in the meantime until she had the restraining order. And it was intense. It was an intense shock, an intense culture shock going from that. Because then when we're hiding out and then suddenly my mom, she'll even say this, she threw the baby out with the bathwater. She was like, everything's evil. Everything's terrible about it. All these things that you were raised with, your entire cultural identity, because that's what it is when you're second gen. That's your cultural identity. That's what you're taught as it's your culture. You don't have anything else. And so I was taught that my cultural identity was horrible and wrong and evil. And I didn't have anything else. I didn't know anything else. Suddenly my mom was like, "Oh yeah, and by the way, let's go get you a haircut." And I was like, "What?" I thought it was gonna hurt. I thought it was gonna hurt to have a haircut. I'd never had a haircut in my life. And how like she took us to McDonald's to eat our first piece of meat and all this kind of stuff. I was a teenager. So as a teenager, you're already like going through identity crisis, right? You know, that's your job as a teenager. And I know this very well as a teacher. Now teenagers are going through identity crisis. Your brain is changing more than it ever does in your entire life. And you're trying to figure out who the hell you are. I had no sense anymore of who I was. I mean, it was incredibly stressful. So suddenly after we got the restraining order, then we're just dropped in back into school, dropped into normal American public school, of all things. And just like, all right, here you go. This is your life now. Figure it out. I mean, I could write a whole other book about the other chapters of my life, trying to just figure out my cultural identity. I still feel like I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm 50 years old now. Like, and I still feel lost and separate a lot and don't know how to relate just to people from normal American culture. Just it's not something that I was raised with. So it caused a lot of cultural confusion, identity crisis, all kinds of yeah. Yeah, I've had to be in therapy a lot over that period.
You had mentioned that you got in therapy as a teenager.
Yeah, so I did when I was dropped in public school. Uh,
You just dropped into being a normal American in public school, cut for a night meet, and now just be normal.
yeah. So I'm like trying to fit in and I'm seeing these kids. So I'm looking around and then the kids that look different are the ones that I'm like attracted to because that's normal to me, right? You look different. So maybe I'll have a connection there. So here's what I did. I parted my hair down the middle and I shaved one whole side of my head. And then I put on all this black goth makeup and all this punk rock gear and all this kind of stuff. And then I went out and I made friends with all the kids. Tried to make friends with all the kids that were doing that kind of same and then found that some of those kids were doing like drug and alcohol support groups and stuff like that, and they were getting therapy. And so I lied. I lied. I said I went to the counselors at my high school and I said, I I I have a drug and alcohol problem and I need therapy. And look, I've been through all this abuse. I kept telling people like I've been through this horrific experience and I try to tell them and they'd look at me like, "What? I don't even understand I can't even comprehend what you're talking about." So I started changing my story and making up things. My arms were all pocked up from bed bug scars. So I started telling people that like I had been burned by cigarettes because immediately like a therapist goes, "Oh God, now that's abuse. I can understand that." So I immediately started lying. I started making up stories so that people could understand that I had been through some horrific trauma.
Just to be seen
Yeah, to be seen,
in your trauma.
to be seen in my trauma, which is really, really important and is something I feel also that as a second gen person, that's something that we also don't get most of the time unless we're talking to each other, which sometimes gets weird with each other, because we trigger each other also. But just having somebody that can see and go, "Oh my God, really? And they can see the trauma, that was really valuable to me. And so as a teenager who was trying to figure out life and the weirdness and all that kind of stuff, I just started making things up so people would see that I was traumatized and would see that I
You were in
needed
pain.
help and that I was in pain. Yeah, I did all these crazy things. So I did that for a while. Yeah, I'm a drug addict and blah, 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 and I need help. And so then in those contexts, I could like share in the support groups and say, yeah, and also I went through this other thing. And people go, oh, okay, that's weird. Then I came home and I started doing a lot of drinking and drugs. And so I would do that. Then after that, I decided to be really even more rebellious. I joined like a born again punk rock Christian group, born again Christian. For a while, I was going to be a born again Christian and everybody else was going to hell. But I related to that because it was an organized religion, right?
And fundamentalism.
And it was very fundamental. It was very fanatical. And it also pissed everybody off in my family to no Alec. Everybody just hated it. God, they hated it because it was like so like I was not being a Sikh. I was not being I was not being a Sikh, but I didn't know what to do. I lost pretty much all of my connection to my other side. My father, I became very angry at and stayed very angry at for a very long time because I begged him to talk to me. I begged him to listen to my stories, and he absolutely just refused to hear me and refused to listen to me. He just said, "This is the best thing. This is the best thing for you. You should have gone back. I don't want to hear your horror stories," and just cut it off. And so I refused visitation with him. Once I got to where I was 15 years old, you can say, "I don't want to go to this parent's house," and you can have a choice. At least they gave me a choice. And so often I refused to go and I wouldn't visit and stuff with him because I was so angry and felt so abandoned by him. And it was very, even when he did try to talk to me, it was like this, I don't know, is it somatic kind of visceral reaction? Like we couldn't even have like,
Revulsion.
yeah, like I could, like my knees, my legs would tremble when I would just try to have a normal conversation with him. Hi, how are you? Conversation. Because I had been so shut down and there was so much fear too. My father was very intimidating. He was a military and guy and he came off that way. Even as a young girl, he never had to like even raise his voice. He just said my full Namkirn Khalsa. And I just was like, like he was a scary big he was enormous. He was a big dude. He was scary. And so to me, to be shut down too by him was also just even more scary. So I refused to have a relationship with him for a very, very long, until basically he was willing to hear me, which as he aged, much, much later in the last parts of his life, he became open to talking to me about it. But yeah, I lost my relationship and my connection even to the community for For a little while, I had some people in the community, but then some of my father's friends found out that I had testified in court, and the family that was affected were friends of my father. So they told him, "Your daughter's never." I had done work for them during the summer. They had like an herbal clinic, and I had done work for them and stuff like that as a teenager, like a teenage jobs or whatever in the summer. They like they said, "Tell her she cannot use this as a reference. We'll never speak to her again. She's not welcome here." And I remember my father coming and asking if he could read my case file. He said, "They gave me your case file and it's sitting right here in a briefcase and I want your permission to read it." But the way he said it was that he didn't believe me and he thought that it was a lie and he was angry at me. So all I did was just sit there and shake like a leaf and cry and say, "No, you can't read my story. You don't get to read my story." So it took over, I don't know, it took over 25 years for my father to actually sit down, maybe even longer, I can't remember, for him to actually sit down and hear. Maybe even, I think it was even more, it might have been like 35 years actually before he sat down and listened to my story.
Just wow.
Yeah.
So after your mom got the restraining order and you started going to public school, you're obviously still in the same city, or did she move you all?
So we were in Utah for a little while after that, but I think it was only like 6 months or something like that. And then my mother, she wanted to be by her family, her parents. Yeah, for emotional support and everything, because suddenly we didn't have the ashram or anything. And my mom was just a single mom of these two very, very traumatized girls. So yeah, we packed up and moved to Oregon where we stayed. I still live in Oregon now. And my father eventually ended up following and moved up to Seattle, so he was not as far away cuz in all of his sternness and everything like that, he also did want to have a relationship with us and wanted to be able to see us and cared about us. So he followed to be nearby and be able to have visitation rights to be able to see us, but he was a couple hours away. So Seattle's like a 3-hour drive away. But there was like an ashram in Seattle. So there was a more of a community up there for him.
Got it.
But yeah, and my sister spent a lot of more time with him than I did.
So like she continued to foster relationship with him. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because my sister fostered a relationship kept fostering a relationship with him and I did with my mother. I mean, we both lived with my mother, but she hung on to it. She hung on to the culture. She hung on to like the religion, the ideas and stuff much, much more than I did. I mean, when she'd go see my dad, she'd go to Solstice still and she'd do japji with him in the morning and do things like that.
Go to the ashram, meet, see the people,
Oh, yeah,
whatever.
and still had a lot of connections. She still had just up until really recently, had a lot of connections with other people still in the community. Maybe she still does have more connections with people in the community, but she'd wake up and on her own, even though she's not married to somebody who's a Sikh, she'd wake up on her own and do some meditation sometimes and stuff like that for a very long time until the stories started coming out during the pandemic.
In 2020.
And that made everybody take pause, I think, and go, "Wait a minute." But she was there. My father remarried to my mom's best friend that lived with us when we were in the ashram, which was really
Not surprised. Not
strange.
surprised.
Yeah, it was an arranged marriage. They were told to get married, and this is somebody that I still love very much and was like a parent to me. It was really difficult for me to watch that happen and to watch my mom going through seeing that happen and stuff. And I refused. I refused to go to the wedding. My sister went. And so that's kind of the example of I took my mom's side, my sister took my dad's side, and we both were almost trying to like caretake our different parents.
Mm-hmm.
Even
That's how we were taught to do.
yeah, exactly.
So then tell us what happened in 2020 for you, or if there's anything more from India or that time. Feel free.
So I always feel like there's more to say, but I feel like I've talked a long time. When the conversation started coming out, I was like, "Oh my God, finally." To me, that was like, finally people are talking about this. I had found over the years, I found little blurbs of people like talking about things here and there, but it was still very quiet. And at one point, I found Narankar, and that was a big deal for me to find that she had been doing this blog and then seeing other people's like little stories on the blog and stuff like that. And I was like, oh God, there's other people. Yeah, the India Cat blog. I found that. And Rishi Nuts. Yeah, Rishi Nuts was, yeah. And that was a big deal to me to find other people because I had been so separated from the community. Nobody I went to school with in India, I think we exchanged letters twice after I got back home, and then we lost each other because I was removed completely and excommunicated. Nobody wanted anything to do with my mother. Yeah, so everybody was like, she was evil. She was wrong and evil because she left, and it was her fault that her kids were traumatized. Was kind of, this is the message that she told me that she felt, was that she was evil and she had done this horrible thing. And so she was excommunicated, basically. Nobody talked to her anymore. She was totally ostracized. And so I didn't have, and all of us kids were from different parts of the world too. And so like I came back from India and everybody was gone and didn't have contact really with anybody for many, many years, felt very separate from that community too. So it was like this huge deal to like be like, oh my God, there's these like people are like having conversations. People are talking about this finally. People, oh my God. So it was like, for me, it was like this, like, it was a really big thing to hear it, to listen to it, to see people finally coming forward and telling their stories and stuff like that. Because I felt like I had been like kind of screaming about it for a long time, down an empty hall, you know? And so it was really powerful and quite amazing to like find that. I even found one. I found Marcella accidentally. I know, and that was like I found her salsa dancing. Like I became like this big salsa dancer. I was like doing it professionally and stuff like that. And then one day I was like in a salsa club and Marcella walks up to me and looked and just like gets right up close to my face and she's like, "Look at my face. Look at my face. Do you remember who I am? Look at me." And I was like, "What?" And very confused. And then I looked at her and then I was like, "Oh my God." And that was so that was how a couple people, that's how I found them, was just like running into it.
Random.
Yeah. Totally
And
random.
she was a student back in GNFC with you.
Her name was Savik before. And so she was a student there. She goes by Marcella now. And and she's Latina. And so yeah, she was out salsa dancing and happened to live in Portland. And so we just like found each other. And it was really, it's been really powerful for me to have like other people's stories like starting to come forward and feeling this like connection, like, oh gosh, like other people went through these things and are talking about it too. I mean, I knew other people. We were already talking about it when we were in India when we were kids. We were all talking about like how horrific our experience was. We all knew at the time, even as kids, that it was not okay what was happening to us and what was going on. But nobody felt like we could do anything. We felt like we were in jail. I mean, we literally were. We were in we had walls around us with broken glass and guards with machine guns and, you know, scary things happening outside the walls, politically and all kinds of stuff like that happening. So we knew, but then for me, we were separated. As far as I was concerned, I was completely separated after that. And so it was kind of amazing. And I've always
Just cut off. You created bonds
yeah,
and then suddenly cut off from that and then cut off from that and then the culture
yeah.
and you're not what you were before and like what the discombobulation.
Yeah. I mean, I remember just kind of in this like need for, at one point, I did go to Solstice as an adult just to see because I'd been so separated for so long. I mean, this was when I was in my late 20s. So it had been many, many years. I think I was 27 and I took my little son, who was 3 years old at the time, and we went and camped out. It was totally like, it was re-traumatizing.
Right.
It was awful. It was really re-traumatizing for me. Because my dad I was like expecting to spend time with my dad and like, and then like see people maybe and like reconnect or something. I just wanted something out of it, like some kind of reconnection or something out of it. And, my dad set up a tent up on a hill and dropped me off up there and left. At- with this little 3-year-old and like in the middle of the desert alone in a tent and like crying and going like, what the hell? Where's my dad? Why didn't he come back? He said he was. And I was up there for probably 3 or 4 days, and he finally ended up coming back, but, at the time, I didn't have a cell phone. This was before cell phones were even, like, a big thing. I didn't have a cell phone, and so I couldn't call anybody. I didn't have a car. He had driven me up there, and, and then my baby got sick to his stomach, and I felt bad, like I was doing something wrong because I was just there, and I had been felt so wronged by being in those places and those experiences stuff. So it was not no, it was not a good experience, going to it.
Because YB is there lecturing too.
He was, and I didn't actually talk to him. I hardly ever interacted with him ever as a child. I mean, I saw him at ladies' camp and stuff like that. I remember him pinching my cheeks really hard, and that was upsetting to me because it always hurt. And, and then being told I had to go up and touch his feet and, all of these things. So he would look at me and say little things every once in a while, but I didn't have like a big relationship with him because we didn't live anywhere near where he was living or anything like that. My dad,
Right.
more,
We say you weren't in the radar.
yeah, I wasn't in the radar, but my dad and my mom were, but I just it wasn't I wasn't as much as a little kid as just around him. But I remember seeing him up there as an adult on that stage. And I remember this like weird point where like he paused when he was talking and I was out. I'm kind of like I wasn't under the cover thing. I was out because I was running after my 3-year-old and he paused and just like stared at me for a little while. And I felt this like my heart started beating really fast because like there's all these people sitting there. I'm like, is he gonna say something to me? Oh my God. But he didn't. I don't know if he was just trying to figure out like who I was or like, whatever. But yeah, he was there and yeah, and there were people, even a couple of people recognized me from India, which was always shocking. But
Like other young people of your generation,
yeah.
because you're now there with no turban, looking more like a yoga student that might be attending solstice as opposed to
Yeah.
somebody born and raised in.
Yeah, yeah, but like Sahari, she just like she saw me like, from a distance and like was like, "Hey, Namkirn." I was like, "What?" But she was the one that had been like assigned to be my older sister in India. And so yeah, lessons. Yeah, but I saw some old friends when I went that time and stuff like that and was able to like connect with some of the people, but we didn't have any conversations. There was no conversation about like our experiences as young people or anything like that during that time period. But yeah, and that but then listening to the stuff, the conversations that happened, during the pandemic and stuff like that, it was like I was like, we have to write this down. Like we have to like I feel like people need to know. Like my father chose not to listen. And he knew those conversations were happening, and he asked me if I thought that he should listen to them. And I was like,
We're talking about the Zoom calls.
"This is Zoom calls is what I'm talking about." Yeah, sorry, I'm jumping back and forth in time, but
I just want
yeah.
listeners to hear, like in 2020, when the Zoom calls for the Khalsa Council, it
Yeah.
just ended up being a floodgate of stories.
Mhm. Yeah, so that was I mean, we were days, on those calls and listening to people's stories and my father knew it was happening and this was the time when he asked me to talk to him. So he asked me about those stories happening, and I said, "Yeah." And I said, "You should prepare yourself. I think, you should listen. It would be a good thing to listen to it, but it's going to be traumatic. It's going to be hard to listen to. Just brace yourself," is what I told him. And he ultimately chose not to. But to on the other hand, he told me, "I am choosing not to listen because I don't feel like, I want to do that, but I want to listen to your story. And that was when it happened. And that was, I mean, I was a couple years ago. I was like in my 40s. My father finally was like, okay, let's set up a time and we can all sit together and I will listen to your story. So he did finally listen and I talked to him about what happened. But it came to it, like, during that time period, I just started thinking about how important our telling our stories and how important connecting about our stories really is for us all. And as second gen, we also do tend to shy away from it. We shy away from each other. We shy away from the stories because they're traumatic for us to tell. I mean, I don't know how I've even told my story right now. I'm not sure how it's going to sound. It probably is all messy and all over the place because I keep kind of going into this, like, weird trauma Swiss cheese brain, when you're talking about it. But I think it's so, like, so important, and I thought, "Well, I'm gonna at least write my story." So I've started writing my own book about my story and just going into deep detail about it, but it's going slow. I've got about 60, 70 pages now. But in that process of starting it, I was like, Man, like, if other people wanna write their stories too, and we can do something together, like, I feel like our story is so important, like, and it's important, and I feel like if this is something that's, like, published and important, then some of the first gen is gonna maybe pay attention, be forced to pay attention, or some of the people that are still sending their kids, maybe they'll be forced to pay attention a little bit more than what's happening right now, because I think it's getting glossed over, and I think that's the crux, like, the most important piece of it is how we're so impacted by this and how it's still happening. Yeah.
Truth bomb, truth bomb. I can't even stress this point enough. The born in survivor story and the impact that the collective web of our lives
Yeah.
and how one person telling your story can awaken memories in each other
Yeah.
that have gone dormant
Yeah.
from self protection and other type of coping mechanisms,
Mhm.
and how normal that is,
Yeah.
and how normal it also is to need each other to heal, because relational trauma happens relationally. It doesn't happen in isolation. So no matter how much personal support we're getting, like you who've had therapy a long, long time,
Yeah.
for me, I only had therapy starting in 2020. And I know lots of people in 3HO that resist therapy, or people who have gotten out of 3HO, and we have no idea that our unconscious indoctrination makes us not get basic support.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're just speaking to it by the importance of writing, sharing our stories collectively, figuring out creative ways to build new road,
Yeah.
because there's triggers among each other because there was so much trauma in those bonds.
Yeah.
And so to undo it will bring up a lot of messy, undealt with trauma, not having to do with each other, but having to do with the context
Yeah.
and each other.
Yeah.
And instead of the focus being on that first gen where they're trying to tell their story about how this could possibly have happened,
Right.
just listen to the young people and what happened.
Right. Just listen just listen to what happened. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And it's so hard. It's still so hard for so many of us, to talk, to speak and tell our stories. I mean, I'm just gonna say a little thing about my sister. I asked her if there was anything that I she didn't want me talking about, and there were a few things that I have left out of the story just to, like, keep her own privacy. But, like, like, she can't, it's hard. It's really hard for her to speak. just to speak about it. And and for her, I could tell it was scary that I was getting on and talking about it. And so, like, it just stays trapped in our bodies. It just, I think,
Yes, it does.
stays trapped
Yes,
in our
it does.
bodies and our hearts and our minds and our spirit and everything. It just stays trapped there if we hold on to it and we can't do anything about it, can't speak on it.
Well, and our identities were formed in that trapped isolation identity sense of self.
Yeah.
And so the silence, the secrecy, and the shame
Yeah.
is a built-in part of our massive cultural identity within 3HO. At least that's been my experience of wrestling with all this in the last number of years.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, the loneliness, one of the major issues I have worked through for years of my own trauma is the loneliness and isolation, the
Yeah.
longing to feel connection to other people and like not knowing how to do it and not being able to do it. That's trauma from from being abandoned, from being isolated, and then from being like singled out and being in this weird
That's right.
situation. It's all, from that. Yeah.
The severe emotional neglect,
Yeah.
severe emotional abandonment. For listeners, this is a cue for you to get the book CPTSD From Surviving to Thriving by Peter Walker, if you haven't, because it's hard to detect what's the stem of this level of deep loneliness and neglect when your identity wasn't really formed with those things culturally in mind.
Yeah.
Meaning we got like bravery and courage and community and consciousness and
Mhm.
super health.
Mhm.
And so placating health and connection, but the feeling that was bred inside was actually separation
Yeah.
and isolation and neglect and hunger and severe abandonment.
Mhm.
And these things are very confusing for any brain to understand.
Yeah, and the response to a lot of us was, "Be strong, don't be weak."
That's right. And don't talk about it.
Yeah, and don't talk about it. Those were the messages that I got very strongly from my father. Be strong, don't be weak, don't talk about it, and keep up, because 'cause you'll be kept up. That's what he
You
said. Keep
up
up and you'll be kept up.
because you'll be kept up. This is a big Kundalini yoga thing.
Yeah. It is.
Still is perpetuated.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And like you said, nobody should be going to India anymore.
No.
And just because you get out doesn't mean these systems don't continue. All the more reason of these stories must be told because like if there was like an India kid's story, there's a chance to be able to let people not just see the Aquarian talk that they give in these yoga spaces and solstice spaces, and they even fetishize the kids.
Yeah.
They talk about the importance of going to India and they do the like Bhangra demonstrations at solstice and they do like full fun rate with pity.
Mhm.
And it what it does is it kind of takes your generation and all the earlier generations and makes up a story about how incredible it was
Yeah.
that our generation and people like Jagat Guru and Dev and different people that are called the Valor Sikhs
Mhm.
are kind of posturized because their children are also children of the next generation kids
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's like the 3rd generation.
using the same teachings, the
Yeah.
same garbage.
The same traumatizing thing. I mean, it's just repeating trauma they're just creating generations of trauma. It's like it's horrific to watch. Like it's Yeah, I can't. And I feel like I know that I've had like telling my story has had an impact on one family, at least for sure, and another family that I lived with in Utah too. Like they were very close with my family and they chose not to send their children because of what they watched my family go through. And I feel like that's important for people to it's important for people to hear about it. It's important for people to see what's happening so that maybe they won't repeat the trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So well said.
Yeah.
So well said. Any more you want to share about what happened in 2020 or anything else in your story before we wrap up?
I don't know. I'm sure I've missed things that I could go back and talk about, but that's the like the main gist of it. 2020 was that was a really important time for me and a really important shift in my life, and I'm really grateful. I still don't know exactly how it all came together and started the phone calls, but very impactful. I really so glad that it was something that happened that impacted my family too, impacted my relationship with my own father and stuff. So it goes back to just, storytelling being like so important. So yeah, that's probably it.
You had mentioned you live in Oregon.
Yeah, I do live in Oregon.
And so do you ever run into people that you know from India? And you had mentioned just kind of how weird that can be and kind of speak to that a little.
Like you meet somebody, you're like, oh my gosh, I remember you from my past. Well, now we're here. Like we could be friends, but it's actually sometimes kind of challenging. At least it's been in my experience. Maybe people have had different experiences. So there's quite a few people here, like in Portland now, but a lot of us are pretty kind of like we don't hang out a lot. We don't spend a lot of time with each other. And I think, Marcella put it really well. Like Marcella and I found each other, gosh, 20 years ago or something, maybe 17 years ago is when I ran into her in the salsa club. And we sat down and we tried to have some conversations about our experiences and stuff. And I had old pictures that I had from India and stuff like that, that I was going to show her and stuff like that. And she came over at one point and it was just like, and then we would see each other out sometimes too, but it was like every time we saw each other, it was like lock in, kind of like lock into this trauma pattern. And we had to talk about it. We had to like just talk about it. And sometimes it was really hard because like we're in a social setting in a salsa club or something like that, and it can be kind of like exhausting too. And she said something at the time. She said, like, I don't know that I can I don't know that I can hang out because it's too triggering for me. And I felt at the time I didn't understand. She was the first person I had ever run into. And so for me, it was kind of sad. I was like, oh, take it personally, like got my feelings hurt,
I want a friend.
yeah, I want a friend that understands me, like that kind of thing. And she was never, she didn't mean it. She didn't mean it in a bad way or anything. She's always been very sweet to me. But basically what she was telling me is that it was too triggering for her just to even see my face and talk to me because we had been close friends in India during my time when I was there. So, and I think that just maybe happens. So it's kind of interesting and difficult. But at the same time, I really appreciate them and love them. And I'm so glad that I ran into them. To have circles of people to talk to, like when we were going through the conversations, the calls and stuff like that, and then going through the reparations, we were all going through the reparations program. I mean, Marcella called me and told me that the lawsuit was happening and the reparations were happening, and that I should call these lawyers and stuff like that and get involved. We'll talk occasionally about it, and we've been able to talk things through with each other when we were talking about the reparations program and stuff like that too. So it's definitely been really, really wonderful to have them, nearby.
That was my experience of both of them in 2020.
Really?
Vocal, and they'd already been vocal for a while. They obviously had been in their own process to be figuring things out a lot more than, say, a lot of people that were more entrenched in 3HO relationships, whether directly or through their family system,
Right,
that may have never even considered that it was traumatizing.
right.
It was just better good than not.
Yeah.
put into this category of it makes you stronger,
Right.
and humor has been used to kind of maintain collective silence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
And I'll say, Neuronkar is definitely one of those people that says, nope, humor is not going to be used
Yeah.
to balk about this experience. And how valuable her voice has been,
Really valuable. Like,
even though it's been a real lone voice out there.
yeah, I know. I am so grateful for all of the stuff that she's done. I mean, just like even like the books that she did. I don't know if you saw them, but like she did these books of images of artwork, and I immediately like just started crying when I saw like the she did the quilts. Our quilts, like what our quilts looked like when we were in India. It was just such a simple little thing, but like for me, just seeing it was just like, oh, just like so personal and so impactful. And I just was so grateful for how outspoken she is too, just because it was hard at first for me to speak too. And so it was really great to like read and see all the things that she was doing. It helped like encourage me to continue to like talk about it and speak up when I felt afraid, So, and I felt like, coming from her too, she has family that's still very connected, and very there and
Very entrenched.
very entrenched, very entrenched. And so for her to have that such a strong voice and be able to speak up like that is just very powerful for me to see. And it helps give me energy to do the same thing. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
I can't agree more. And Marcella had the ability to be speaking to things that a lot of people didn't even have memories of anymore. And that's a tough thing in trauma recovery. And it goes to speak to what you were talking about when there's such bonding that happens over such complex trauma. And some people are remembering at different levels and layers of themselves and are recovering themselves at different stages. And how scary it can be to tell your story because you don't want to share somebody else's story that happens to be a part of your story,
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah.
and your parents
Yeah.
and all of the obligations you hold to keep them safe,
Yep.
even though they should have kept you safe.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really, yeah. It's big being able to share it. Just, yeah. I mean, I'm having nervousness about just talking about this. I definitely called my mom and called my sister and was like, anything you don't want me to say? Because people are going to hear this thing. But like, but they were pretty okay with it. My mom's been out for a long time and my sister, they were okay with it. But I could tell my sister was nervous. And so that made me take pause, and I still have, my father has passed away recently, but my stepmother's still there, and she still lives there across from the
In the
range.
drama.
Yeah, she's still in the Dharma, and I love her very much. And so there's a lot of just, uh,
It's
I
complex.
it's very complex,
But
very com
I thank you for your courage. Your voice does matter, and your story does matter.
Thank you.
And I can't agree with you more that all born in survivors deserve to hear their story told.
Yeah.
It's important, and it's more important than we can even register
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
in our personal healing and our collective healing for and with each other.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
So, yeah, you've heard me a lot, folks, trying to center the born in second gen stories. I want you to remember all stories are welcome on the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast. But born in survivors, those of us who are born into 3HO, I want you to know that it's so normal to be scared and not ready to tell your story. And it's also very okay to come tell your story, even when it doesn't necessarily fully make sense yet, because it's a lifetime of making sense of things that may never make sense. That's a part of what trauma recovery is and cult recovery.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree.
Your voice of coming in telling us that it really makes a difference. Um, I didn't go to India, so there's this kind of unique segment of those of you that went and kind of this built-in secrecy bond around it.
Yeah.
And you coming to tell your story is supporting what I experience as like a dam of safety, like it's a safety bond, but it's a perceived safety
Yeah.
that's so rooted into our cultural identity. And each of us sharing our story, um, I think, breeds the fibers that it takes to support each other in breaking that silence.
I agree. That's my hope. That's why I wanted to speak. Is hopefully other people can do too.
Mhm. Totally. Before we wrap up, tell us why you chose the song that you chose.
It was very hard for me to pick a song, actually, because I was like, I don't want to put any Kirtan on there or anything like that. I it's a huge mix, right? It's like Irish music mixed with Indian Bhangra music. And so like whenever I hear it, it kind of like hits me in a way that it reminds me a little bit of myself as a child, like a young person, because I had all these, it's kind of hip hoppy too. And so like because I was like trying to like kind of mix in with some cultures and try to find myself and stuff like that. And I had this big, Bangla kind of India history thing, but I'm not Indian. And then kind of mixed with the Irish thing, got some Irish genetics. I don't know. It just was something that I related to on more of a personal level than just a regular song that I liked, but mainly just because of where the different types of music where they come from and stuff.
All right, folks, let's listen to a snippet of her song by Delhi to Dublin. The song is called Apples.
As usual, I don't share the whole song because of copyright purposes, but you can check the link in the show notes for the Uncomfortable Conversations playlist and listen to the mixture of music of all of the conversations so far. I want to say thank you to Namkirn
Yeah,
for showing up and telling your story.
thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been another episode of the Uncomfortable Conversations, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. If you'd like to contribute to this broadcast, you can make a one-time or monthly donation at the link in the show notes. And to be a guest on the podcast, please send me an email to gn@gurunischan.com. And you can subscribe and follow my work at gurunischan.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.